Good morning. Today we're going to look at is the natural progression of evolution. Sounds like a heavy topic, right? It's not. It's not. Now, we all want something in our life to change, or we want something in the world to change. But for many of us, we don't want any change if it's going to affect us, if it's going to affect our job or our career or our family. A change doesn't happen fast. We all know this. Why? Why is that the case? It could be fear. It could be doubt. It could be distrust. The major fear is that we're going to lose something. Something is going to be taken away from us. And fear drives decisions. Fear drives people to vote. Fear causes stagnation, even when it's apparent that change is needed. Before change can occur, we have to uncover and address the root cause of these fears. Now, this is going to require leaders with a strategy and an understanding of history. And we're going to meet one right now. My guest today is Dr. ClauDean Kizart. Did I pronounce that right?
Kizart.
Better known as Dr. K. So we're going to go with Dr. K. All right. Now, she is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Tidewater Community College. She's a native of Chicago, a mother of 2 grade school age children. She's worked in the field of education for 24 years. She knows what she's doing in various capacities. But prior to her position at Tidewater, she was the equity and literacy trainer for the state of Missouri. Big job. And she worked closely with the Office of Student Affairs at St. Louis Community College, and she chose to close achievement gaps, particularly for first-generation students and historically disadvantaged student populations. Now, what I love about Dr. K is she's dedicated her life to providing data, key word, data-informed, equitable solutions. Dr. K, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I am very honored to be on this show and to meet your acquaintance. You are an amazing human being and an amazing writer. And I'm just really honored to be in your presence and to be acquainted and to do this interview with you.
Well, the feeling is absolutely mutual. So, Dr. K, give the viewers around the world a little bit about your background. How did you evolve into where you are now?
So I am from Chicago. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago in a predominantly African-American community, again, on the south side. If you know anybody from the south side of Chicago, we're often very proud to be from the south side of Chicago.
Absolutely.
So irrespective of what you hear about the south side of Chicago, what you got to know for a fact is that there is community, there is camaraderie, there are gatherings. And so that's how I was raised. I was raised around community. I was raised going to Sunday dinner, which was at my grandparents' house, which is where I was raised with my mom and my sisters and my cousins. We always had people in our house. When I graduated from Thornton Township High School in Harvey, Illinois, I went to college because I was told, of course, you're supposed to go to college.
That's right.
And that was the expectation. But my grandmother said to me that, she said, Deanie, if you happen to realize that college is not for you, you come on back home. We need lots of people and lots of different people to do different things. And so I went away to college. And honestly, Frank, my first year, I didn't do so well. I ended up on academic probation my first year. You talk about C's and D's and maybe an F or 2. And so I ended up on academic probation. And then I transferred to Southern in Edwardsville, thinking that my mother was like, it's a smaller community, it's a smaller campus, it's not the party school, so maybe it'll do better there. I didn't do so well there. And I ended up being dismissed from school. So it's interesting. And I share this because, this progression in education and as an educator didn't start off with flowers and roses and easy. And I tell people that where you even though you may have made mistakes, and I was reflecting about this morning and giving thanks for all the mistakes that I've made, right? Both academically and
Right.
personally, because they taught me something. And one of the main things that it taught me is compassion, because oftentimes we have compassion and empathy um, for people and situations when we've lived through them. At least that's
Yes.
the goal, because we've lived
Yes.
through them, we operate with less judgment, right? And I really do believe that even though at the time, it felt like I was failing, I can honestly say that when I got my act together, I realized that those were not failures. Those were intentional setups to assist me with having compassion and assist me with operating with empathy with others. So, for example, when I finally got my act together, it was because I was in a program called Semanama Like Wachanga. And I learned, I know that's a big name, uh, but there was a woman by the name of Veronica Banks, and hope she doesn't mind me using her name, but she's amazing. And she said to me, there's a lot of people on this planet doing a lot of good work, and you just sitting around doing nothing. And that
Ooh,
hurt my feelings. It was harsh. It was very harsh,
yes.
very harsh. And she was like, what unnerves you? What bothers you about humanity? And I said, well, the fact that kids can't read. Again, I'm a hot at this time, hot-headed. Maybe I was 21 at the time. I was like, these kids, I was working at this day camp. These fifth graders can't even read. I don't know what's wrong with their teachers and their mothers, and their parents in general, that they can't read. And she said, well, why don't you become a teacher and help them read? The next morning, I got the bus to Harris Stowe State University. Went to financial aid because I messed up my financial aid. I needed to make sure that I could even go to school. And I went into the financial aid office and I told those ladies, I said, I want to be a teacher. And I know that I messed up at school before and I need to know how to afford it. Fast forward, I ended up working in the financial aid office throughout my college career in my baccalaureate degree, my undergrad. I applied for scholarships. I ended up graduating magna cum laude with
Very
honors
good. Wow.
and honors. Then I went straight to get a master's. I graduated with my master's with a 3.9 GPA. Went to Lindenwood University to receive my doctoral degree. I went to a brick and mortar face to face. I like face to face more than online, but I graduated with honors from there as well. I got 1B my entire doctoral degree, and that was when I had my child during the summer. And those summer classes, I should have known to take off, but I didn't. I was on a roll, so I was in the hospital typing up assignments. Um, so I think all of those lived experiences made me open and made me see humanity in a way, because it allowed me to see my own humanity and
Hmm.
helped me to see humanity in a way that is very loving. I think there's a lot of good in the world. On the way, throughout those journeys, there was always someone there to give me encouragement, give me guidance, be a little harsh with me, because I don't know if it's because I'm that South Side lady that sometimes I needed it straight, you know. But to give me what I needed. And so one of my goals as an educator and as an administrator is to be a positive impact in the field of education, because I know that education is it's a gateway to a and I won't say to a better life. It is a gateway to an affluent and healthy life. What do we know? People who are educated, they vote. People who are educated, they eat healthier. People who are educated, they are healthier, because they have a wide understanding of this planet in which we live in and the importance of knowledge, right? And so,
Hmm.
how can one of my jobs and one of my gifts, I think, is supporting humanity in a way that is inclusive, so that we um, we all are empowered to work better together.
Absolutely. Now, President Kennedy, way back when, said that a rising tide lifts all boats, and education is that rising tide. It lifts all boats, gives you an opportunity, not a promise, just an opportunity.
Right.
And one of the challenges when we discussed, Dr. Katie and I spoke earlier, was the demographics have changed in the United States. It has changed. And we're a much more diverse population than we were, but these programs that will help us with that rising tide are constantly under attack. So where do we find the common ground? How do we find this in this evolution?
So one of the things that you started with, Frank, was scarcity. And I recently wrote a book, and it's in publication now. It will be coming out through Solution Tree. And that book is focused on being beyond implicit and explicit bias. A lot of times in education, and even in the business world, we talk about conscious and unconscious bias, explicit and implicit bias. And the important is what we have to do is get beyond conscious and unconscious and call the bias what it is.
Yes.
Scarcity bias is born from this space of thinking that there's not enough time, there's not enough energy, there's not enough money. Those valued resources that we as human beings place high value on, right? So we have to call a thing a thing, and we have to call scarcity bias what it is. I think we're at a space, Frank, where we have to really take a pause and examine our beliefs and examine our views and make sure that our beliefs and our views are in alignment with our actions. There is no scarcity, not for real, right?
Absolutely right.
There's enough for all of us. There's enough for all of us. And I think part of what we must do is understand that there is enough for us all. The other thing that we must do is we must look at the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a human imperative. One of the things that I shared with you on our, just outside of this format was that I'm very intentional about saying diversity, equity, and inclusion, because when people think of DEI, I've that people kind of put it in this lump sum, right? They are three separate terms with three separate meanings, right?
Yes.
We are a diverse society, and we are growing more and more diverse. If you look at our Constitution, if you look at, the information on the Statue of Liberty, right? We have always been a country that has said, this is a melting pot. This is a place where, not a melting pot so much, but this is a place where everybody is welcomed, right? People have referred to the United States as a melting pot. But in the United States, this is a place where we have been told that everybody is welcomed. But if you extend that to the world, we live in a diverse world.
Yes.
This is a diverse planet. The question, the big question for us who work as professionals in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion is, how do we support academia, businesses, government, all these various sectors of our world in developing policies? Because diversity, equity, and inclusion work is not just about training. The training is important, but we have to look at our policies, because often the policies are designed for the people who develop the policies, right?
Yes, exactly.
We have to look at that educational piece. The educational piece helps us to understand how we work. How can we work with each other? How can we build capacity to be understanding, to be considerate of each other? Sometimes we fear what we don't know, right?
Absolutely.
And so the work of training in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion is to remove the fear so that we're operating in knowing, right?
Absolutely.
I'll give a perfect example. This is currently Pride Month. And shout out to our LGBTQ plus friends and family. There was a time last year I did an article and I did some research because I love research, Frank. I do. I kind of get into, I call it the Alice in Wonderland
Hmm.
hole. I could keep going and going and going. And I have to say, wait a minute, go eat. But in that research, I learned that the LGBTQ plus communities have been around for thousands of years.
Yes.
In places like Indonesia, they have identified 5 genders: male, female, male, female, female, male, and transgender, right? The Native American community has often identified and spoke highly of what we call two-spirited people. Why is that important? That's knowledge, right?
Hmm.
So that training aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion work and belongingness work is important because with knowledge, we can fear less, right? That
Yes.
equity piece is key. And unfortunately, I think that's where we get caught up sometimes. It's very unfortunate because there's so many definitions of equity.
Yes.
But if we just simplify, and I have a sign in my house that I painted at a party and it says simplicity, right? So if we were to simplify equity, it would be fairness, right? And how do we get to what is fair and what is just? We have to listen. So one of the things I feel very good about in the last couple of years is working with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council at Tidewater Community College on a climate and culture survey. It's a post survey. It was the first ever done at our community college. I hope more community colleges and universities do post surveys because it helps to take the pulse of the college community. We did this for both employees and for students, and it's a way to be equitable because you have to listen to people. You have to listen to people share with you what their needs are, and not sit in the tower and say, "This is what I know you need." Right?
Yes.
Bring me to the table and talk to me. When you look at building equity in your house, you look at what's broken and you fix what's broken so that you can build the equity in your house. That means you have to pay attention, right?
Hmm.
So my
And
thoughts on that.
equity, when we spoke, you were very passionate about it doesn't mean everything is equal.
No,
And you
and
gave us
that's
an
part of the
example.
confusion too. Yes. So that's part of the confusion too. People think that equity is synonymous with giving people something they didn't earn or giving people something they didn't deserve. And that is just simply not true. Uh, I have often said I would love to sit in the room with some of our politicians that are against equity work and just make sure at least that they have the correct shared language. Because I think that if we really did, we wouldn't fight against equity so hard.
Yes.
Um, I worked, and I'll give an example. Um, as a equity and literacy trainer for the state of Missouri, I was sent to different school districts. And one of the school districts that I was sent to was called Perryville. And Perryville, I love the folks out there, but I tell you what, it didn't start out like that. When I first got to Perryville, I noticed that I was the only brown person in the area, period. There were Confederate flags flying
Wow.
off of cars in front of houses. And I got to the school that I was assigned to for 3 years, and it was to go to do professional development to assist them in balanced literacy and some equitable principles and practices. And when I walked in the room, when I tell you those men and women leaned back in their seats, and you could tell they didn't want to hear a thing I had said. Um, and so that first year was rough.
Right.
By the second year, They call me Miss ClauDean.
Yeah, they do.
Miss ClauDean.
That's the
By the
Southern
second
way.
year, it was like we were growing as friends, right? By the third year, there were no more Confederate flags. And when it was time for me to leave, the people who had back, were in their seats back, like looking at me
Mhm.
like, "What here?" They told me, we didn't want you here, but now we can't imagine you not being here." We hugged, we cried. It was beautiful. Those are the stories about diversity, equity, and inclusion work that I wish were told more often. What happens when there is a change? What happens when there is a softening and you can work together? One of the things that I noticed in that community, though, when I say it was predominantly white, there was not a black face that I saw, right? Um, they had some strong equity issues, right? Some strong inclusion issues that were
Mhm.
leading to issues in academics and social issues as well. There were families who were this was a big farm community, and so there were families who had raised generational farming, but because of big pharma and big companies, those families were no longer seeing the
Being
profit.
pushed out. Mhm.
Mhm. And so their children were not going to have the farms to rely on. And so they were needing to adjust. There was a young lady who name is will be, of course, anonymous. But there was a young lady who was a high school student. She was a senior, and one of the teachers asked me, "Miss ClauDean, can you talk to her about college?" And so I started to talk to her about college, and I know my voice kind of got a little sad because it's a sad situation in my opinion. But she wanted to go to college. She definitely did. She kept saying that she wants to major in graphic design and art.
Mm.
But her parents told her that she had to stay. And, they didn't want her going off and thinking that she was somebody. And unfortunately, I heard that story when I did my dissertation. I did a lot of qualitative interviews, and I heard from Hispanic students, from African American students, from white students, that often being a first generation student, the pushback is often from their families
Exactly.
because there's this fear of if you go off and you think you're better than us and you won't be around to help your family. um, and so that's an equity issue, right? And this young lady, she went to school but then came back because her family needed her, right? And when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think that sometimes we live too much in that race and ethnicity space because
Exactly.
this work is inclusive of race and ethnicity, but far beyond it as well. The race and ethnicity challenges are what we see, but there's other things that we don't see, right? You could have three African American women in the room, and we all come from different lived experiences and backgrounds, right? But if you think you're going to put, there was a school district who decided to celebrate Black History Month by having watermelon and chicken, right? And some of the students were vegans and vegetarians. It ended up all over the news, right? So you're
Mhm.
assuming that just because you have Black and brown people in the space that everybody's gonna like watermelon and chicken, right? Well, there may be others who like watermelon and chicken, and on their diversity month, you include something you think that they like, right?
That's right.
Um, there's that space of fairness, giving people and I want to remove the word giving, right?
Mhm.
Because I think that I said that too quick because it's not about giving, it's about honoring, right?
And
Honoring
order.
who lives in this country, honoring who works in your company, honoring who is educated in your system, right? And the way you do that is through the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Exactly.
You
You
all
get an
will please
example.
give me, please.
You gave me an example when we were talking on the equity thing. She said, look at it like a plant. We lost your sound.
I'm here.
There we go. We're back. Good. We had a thing where you said to me, let's put it in simple terms. You have a plant, you have a dogwood tree, and you have a rose bush. Do you give them the same nutrients? Do you give them the same? No, you don't. Each one needs what they need.
Right.
That's what we're trying to get from equity is what's fair, what do they need,
Which
and
means we
how
have to listen.
exactly. I love it. The inclusion piece is something where I hear a great deal of, well, you don't deserve it, or you got there because of, right? And I hear this. We had a big discussion with one group, and we won't name the college, but the gentleman had went to the major college, and he was talking about well, it's not fair that these others are getting it, and they're taking something from us, is what he said. And I said, well, your parents went to this school, and he said yes, and they donate to this school, and I said yes, and you got into the school because your legacy, and he said, well, yeah. And I said, that's an inclusion program.
Yeah.
That's a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. And he goes, no, it's not. We earned that. And I said, you didn't earn it.
Somebody work to make sure you have it.
Yes.
And that's the word, right? So since I was talking about first generation students, next week I am presenting at the Global Mind Ed conference on the intersectionality of diversity, equity, and inclusion work in first generation students. A lot of people assume that first generation students are often minorities, right? Black and brown folks. The reality is that that's not true. And so when you don't have a system in your institution that intentionally supports first generation college students, often you lose them.
Yes.
Because there is a certain cultural capital that is often missing from first generation college students, right? Cultural capital is what you learn when you are in quote unquote affluent communities or communities where everybody has, like, the education aspect is expected. That's what cultural capital is. So cultural capital is, unfortunately, sometimes cultural capital is equated to to voting, right? You know, if you are in a family where they have conversations about voting, you are building that cultural capital, that understanding about voting. If you're in a family that goes to the opera, that goes to plays, then you're building that cultural capital around having enjoyable experiences that are not just about survival.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible. Now you have a minor or a specialty in history also, and along with all your other degrees. And you said to me, the importance of history is critical. Elaborate more on that.
So, a couple of years ago, an educator, was he a superintendent? No, he was the head of a school, came to me and asked me about diversity, equity, inclusion work. He was trying to convince his board that they needed the diversity, equity, inclusion work, and he wanted to hire me. Actually, he ended up hiring me as a consultant for that particular school. And one of the things that they needed to understand was history, that the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is a natural space of progression for where we are. During the civil rights movement, the focus was on equality, like people being able to come in the same doors, go in the same space, go in the same movie, area, drink out of the same water fountain, go to the same swimming pool, right? The focus was equality, being able to have the same. What I wish would have happened at the time is also the focus and the conversations about equity, because you can have equality but not have equity.
Correct.
Right? Because you could invite everybody to the table, but then everybody is expected to assimilate, or you're not looking out for everybody. You don't make policies and practices and things of that nature for everyone. And so then people fall through the cracks, and then they're told, well, it's your fault you fell through the cracks. No, the system was only designed for a particular group of people, but we're all part of this system.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And history is something that it's a slow process. And when I hear people, well, we've always done it like that. Well, no, we didn't always do it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. These kinds of programs is how we ended slavery. This is how women got the right to vote. This is how we got veteran benefits. This is how women got to be able to have credit cards. All of these things, when you look back at history, they're a battle. It's not going to come quick, easy. The haves aren't going to let go.
Exactly.
And you can't I hear people say, well, you can't firebomb buildings. Well, no, you can't do that, but it's still part of the education process. We must know what history and then how it impacts where we are today, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is
Yep. We lost our connection. Okay. Well, we're bringing Dr. K back. Apparently we lost the connection, and there she is again.
Where we are, and I apologize, we lost the connection. Where we are is a natural progression.
Right.
Again, for this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we're, almost 60 years after the civil rights law was passed. But what we have seen is that there is still a lot of challenges, right? And I'll give, as an educator, I'll give the educator imperative, right? Or the educator example. We still see a large amount, a disproportionate amount of Black and Brown, but not just Black and Brown students, but students who are, Bosnian, students where English is not their first language, right? Having huge challenges in education, right? One might say, well, it's the students. Could it be that we're not as prepared for the students as we need to be?
Exactly.
And if we're not as prepared for the students as we need to be, how do we get prepared for the students as we need to be? One of my colleagues, Kim Beauvais, and she's often said, well, this statement came from somebody else. But when I think about this statement, I think about her. The best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago.
Exactly.
But the best time now, the other best time is now.
Exactly. That's a great answer.
And so the best time, yes, it would have been great if 50 years ago we made sure to really take our time to understand how to work with each other. And maybe we wouldn't be 60 years into integration. And that Civil Rights Act did not just impact African Americans. That Civil Rights Act impacted a lot of people: Native Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, impacted a lot of people. And I think sometimes that, from a historian perspective, is something that we need to clarify even more, that the work of equality at that time was not just related to Black and Brown people. It impacted in positive ways a lot of people, right? And interestingly, you will still see that, unfortunately, those subgroups are still a lot of those subgroups are still struggling in academia. And sometimes it's because of the climate and the culture that they're in. Sometimes it's because of, lower social economics and not having books and not having computers and things of that nature at home. But sometimes it's about the educators and the educational system, right? And how we need to do a better job of having more equity minded principles and practices.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it comes down to almost like a designer model.
Yeah.
Who's in this mix?
Yeah.
And how do we address where everyone has the opportunity?
Right.
And when I lived in Seattle, we had a pretty good population that came from Yugoslavia,
Mm-hmm.
post-war, now
Mm-hmm.
Serbia, Croatia, right? So they come over, and some of them were at college age, but they didn't speak English.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the University of Washington, we'll give kudos to here, put a great deal of emphasis
Yeah.
on we're going to have English classes, English programs. My
Mm-hmm.
daughter now works Salem for Refugees up in Salem, Oregon, and her
Beautiful.
thing is to deal with the education component and making sure we have interpreters and making sure, and she plays at both ends of the school. You must provide these things, and I will help you find these people. Now, the refugee coming in, the individual, the family, you got to put in the effort. We're going to give you the opportunity, but you also have to put in the effort. So it's not just a one-way thing. And they understand that, and they want that. That's why they came here. And I love your statement about the Statue of Liberty. There's no qualifying statements on the Statue of Liberty. You can come here providing you're this, or this.
Yep.
It's not there. So
Yep.
both sides, both parties in the equation need to see, yes, this is for the overall betterment of everything and everyone.
Absolutely.
And we both put in time and the energy.
Absolutely. When we
I
think
love
about the statement, liberty and justice for all, right? Liberty and justice of all. It's in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Right.
Justice, right? Liberty, freedom, right? The freedom to walk down the street and know that you're safe, right? The freedom to go to the movie theater and not be harassed, because they think that you snuck in. The freedom, the liberty to have a great education, especially when you know that the person sitting next to you, who may not look like you, is getting a different type of education than you're getting. The freedom to be able to go to a job interview and actually them not butcher your name, right? There's a lot in a name.
Mm-hmm.
There's history in the name. There's one of my colleagues shared with me that when that people give her a nickname and she doesn't like it, but she didn't know how to address it, and she didn't want to upset other people by correcting them on her name. And I said, no, you have to correct people on your name. And she was just like, I don't know what to say. So when we talk about the training aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I see a lot on LinkedIn and other in the news about how training doesn't work and how people have gotten rid of training. And it's not the training that doesn't work. Training is amazing. Good training is amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to partner that training with practices and policies.
Exactly. And I remember my corporate life.
Go ahead.
In our corporate life, we would have to go through all of the training, mandatory training post the Civil Rights Act, and the trainers, they weren't trained on how to implement this or how to pass it on. It was more, okay, we got to be here because they said we have to be here, so let's just get through this as fast as possible.
Right.
But then it didn't work its way up.
Right.
And when I became a CEO, it finally struck me is that, look, culture comes from the top down.
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Innovation comes bottom up, but culture comes from the top down. And if you're not committed at the higher level, if you say, well, we're going to do this training, well, just get it out of the way, right?
Mhm.
Then
Mhm.
you're going to get nothing. It's going to go
Absolutely.
nowhere.
Absolutely. It's interesting you say that. I have a LLC, Dr. Kizart Inc. And one of the things that I do is I serve as a consultant with companies. So one of my business partners or clients is Chartway Bank, and another one has been Elizabeth River. But I will only work with companies that have a mission and vision related to diversity, equity, inclusion. And I'll tell you why. And if they don't have one, my role is to assist them in developing one, right?
Yes.
And often that is something I'm like, we need to do that first. We can do the training simultaneously, but we need to make sure that this training is sticking to something. But if you have no mission, no vision, not even part of your strategic plan, the work of inclusion, the work of equity, even if you say the work of inclusion and you're too confused about the word of equity, at least inclusion, a diverse and inclusive workplace, right? Then your training is often for naught. What is it sticking to? Some people will do this work because it's the right thing to do. Some people will do this work because it is part of policy to do. And we have to meet people where they are. And so we have to put in the policies. We have to make sure that there are tangible and clear goals around diversity and inclusion as it relates to your company or your academic institution, while we do the training, while we look at the policies and add policies and possibly reconstruct policies, right? We've got to do that now, Frank. In 2014, that was the first time in this country's, and I'm careful with my words because we're talking about data, right?
Correct.
The first time that the data showed that the incoming students in 2014, that that the minority were the majority.
Correct.
Right? That was 2014. Those students are about to go to college.
Yes, they are.
Those students are going to head into the workforce soon. Those students, if we're all honest with ourselves, they are more vocal. They are more opinionated. They are more, nope, you're not going to do that to me, right? And just for example, last year the EEOC saw a uptick of discrimination complaints in the main areas of race, age, disability.
Mm-hmm.
Right? 2 weeks ago, a woman won a lawsuit. The lawsuit was about religious discrimination. To me, she set a precedence.
Yes, she did.
Because if one person can sue for religious discrimination, so can the person who is Muslim who doesn't have a place to pray on campus, or who isn't allowed to during Ramadan to pray in their cubicle, in their office, or who is ridiculed, or who is teased, or who is reprimanded for praying that during their non-break time or whatever, right? If she set that precedent, that's something that companies need to start looking at.
Absolutely.
So if you want to do the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion because it's the right thing to do it because you may get sued. I tell the institution that I work at now, part of my job is to make sure that we're doing the right thing, but also to keep us out of the newspaper in negative ways, right? If we have a student who is transgender having an issue with where to go to the restroom, that's something we need to repair, right?
Yes.
It's because all in this day and age, all somebody got to do is tweet it or exit, whatever they call it now.
Yes.
Put it on social and verify it, and it becomes a big issue, right?
That's right.
When we really need to do is to be proactive. What are those subgroups? What are those demographics that we need to pay attention to, and that we need to develop policies and procedures that are inclusive to them, and then how do we bring them to the table to help inform us of those policies and practices that we need to make sure to include. That's the question, and that's the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not as a program but as a profession.
Exactly. I love it. Well, Dr. K, we're just about out of time. What last thoughts do you want to leave with the listeners and the viewers around the world?
The work of diversity, equity, inclusion, belongingness, accessibility is a human imperative all around this world. And two things can be true at the same time. I call it the CEO of the local YWCA, Dr. Michelle Ellis Young. I call her Auntie Michelle. She often, one of her favorite quotes is right in the corner where you are. Although this is a social imperative for our world, our community, our nation as a world, brighten the corner where you are. How can you think about ways, and if you don't know ways, reach out to a professional, because this is a profession, right? Yes. I am a professional in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion. My doctoral degree is focused on equity as it relates to first generation college students. I've done extensive research in this field. Hire a professional in this field that has the empathy, right, and the compassion for themselves and others, right? Because when we have capacity and empathy for ourselves and others, we make sure that those quote unquote others are at the table to help guide. I'm a cisgender African American woman. When I'm thinking about policies and I'm thinking about things that relate to the LGBTQ plus IA community, I go talk to people who are in that community.
Exactly.
That's fair. So brighten the corner where you are. Think about how you, whether you're in academics, whether you are in business, think about how you may be allowing scarcity bias to inform your decisions, and let that go. Realizing that there is no lack, there is an abundance. And part of what makes this planet and this country great is the diversity that is in it. Now, how can we make sure that we honor it? We do that with the work and through the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. I love that point. Now, how can people reach you? Because after they see this, they're going to want to talk to you.
My email address is DocKizart, so DocKizart@gmail.com. I know some people say don't use your Gmail as business, but listen, I told you I'm all about simplicity. It's simple.
Mine's the same. Keep it as easy as possible.
DocKizart@gmail.com. You can also reach out to me via LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as Dr. ClauDean Kizart. And I don't even mind if you call or text me. 618-363-9238. 618-363-9238. This is a work of love. My mother taught me that love is an action word. I do this work because I really do love this planet, and I really do love humanity. And love is an action word. This is my way of actualizing and bringing action to the essence and the energy of love.
Perfect. I love this. Now, as I just said, we're just about out of time. I want to thank Dr. K again for showing us the patience to stay the course, persistence to discover and address the root cause of resistance. And as she said here at the end, that love is an action word. You have to take action. Move forward. Now you can see this on my podcast, which is called Life Altering Events, on my YouTube channel. It'll be on Parade Deck. I'll also send links to Dr. K, and she'll post them everywhere she posts her information. If you use the YouTube channel, please subscribe. Let me leave you with this. None of us are in this alone.
That's
The
right.
secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are.
Mm,
And today, Dr. K showed us where many of those rocks are. If you want to find out more, where more rocks are, contact her, contact me. We'll see you next week. Thank you again.
thank you. Thank you.